From Music for All and presented by Yamaha, it's Mind the Gap, a practical podcast series for young and future music educators. On the program, State Advocacy Engagement Manager for the National Association for Music Education,
Jasmine Sutton,
Director of Performing Arts and Sports for the National Federation of High School State Associations, Dr. James Weaver. Our conversation moderated by Susan Smith. Please welcome Susan Smith.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Smith. I think that some of our intro didn't work there as we're getting started, but we're so glad you're here with us on Mind the Gap with Music for All. Welcome to the second season of Mind the Gap, a webinar series focused on young and new teachers and those student teachers whose experiences have been and continue to be interrupted by the pandemic. We're thrilled to be back with you. Season 1 was 22 episodes on a range of topics that you can find on the Music for All YouTube channel or as a podcast where you listen to those. My name is Susan Smith, and I'm an educational consultant for Music for All, a lecturer in music education at Troy University in Troy, Alabama, and I'm also chair of the NAFME Collegiate Advisory Council. I've taught at all levels in areas of music education, and I'm especially interested in supporting young teachers as my daughters are both starting their 3rd and 5th years as music educators. My colleague and friend David Starnes, Director of Orchestras at Kennesaw Mountain High School, has been co-hosting on these webinars with me since June 20th of 2020, and I think he has a fall concert this evening, so he's not with us tonight. We're all happy to be back to those concerts. We've all been affected by the pandemic personally and also as educators, and we've had to learn to be the voice for our arts programs more than we ever thought. With us tonight are two people that have been and continue to be on the forefront for the fight to support music education. Jasmine, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jazzmone, jazz like music, and Monet like the artist, Jazzmone. And I serve as the State Advocacy Engagement Manager for the National Association for Music Education. I just started this position in July, so coming up on about 4 months. Wait, we're in October, so I'll be 5 soon. Yeah, so before I came to the NAFME family or team staff, I actually was an educator in the classroom as an elementary music educator. So I'm excited to be here tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. And James Weaver, tell us about yourself.
Great. Thanks, Susan. Good evening, everybody. My name is pretty straightforward, so it's what it is. I'm the Director of Performing Arts and Sports for the National Federation of State High School Associations. So in my role, I oversee the performing arts world, which is in music, speech, debate, theater, academic competition, cheer, and dance. And for some reason, I still oversee boys lacrosse. Before I came into the Federation 6 years ago, I was a large district administrator. I was a curriculum coordinator for a district of about 25,000 students. Before that, I was a state director of performing arts in the state of South Dakota, and I taught orchestra for 6 years before then in northwestern Minnesota and northeastern South Dakota at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels when I was teaching. So I kind of have that teaching purview and then switching to the dark side of administration purview.
The dark side. No.
We all know it's true.
Well, you both bring such experience with you, and we're so thrilled to have you with us. I have to admit, the idea for the session this evening came when I heard Jasmine was talking about in her role how she was having to talk with teachers all the time about some misconceptions out there and things that they're still having to fight to make sure that they can have music classes and things. And so we're going to start off tonight. I've already asked each of you to kind of think about this a little bit, but what are the two biggest challenges or misconceptions that you see out there in the education world? Jasmine, let's start with you.
So I think everything is relative to where you are, right? The resources you have, the administration that you're working with, the students that you're working with. My motto in life is everything is relative. But I think the hardest struggle or challenge that teachers are dealing with, on top of being an educator, just in a regular year, no COVID included, they have protocols that they need to think about. They have learning loss that they have to work with. They have, some of them are still teaching kids online and kids in the building. So I think just the added stressors of the protocols and safety measures, which are all valid and important, but already on a strained and tight schedule, makes it just an extra challenge for our educators. So that's the biggest challenge I think our educators are facing, is just that extra workload that comes with teaching music education in the fall we're still recovering from this pandemic. So
And do you think there's some misconceptions that you're seeing from the areas you've been speaking to concerning the things in the classroom?
I think probably that we're so ready to be back to normal and that our kids didn't experience a learning loss. Oftentimes when we are talking about learning loss, music education is left out and our kids had to struggle just like every other subject. So I think that's probably a misconception that's happening is, oh, we're back in the classroom and we're ready to pick up those instruments and play. But it's been almost a year and a half of them not learning the traditional way in which they're learning. Not to say that learning isn't happening, it's just the expectations of pre-COVID definitely cannot happen, October 2021 from what we've missed in a year and a half of learning.
Yeah, I think we were all struck in the last couple of weeks with that thing that's been going around Facebook. How the people that are in fourth grade now, the year that they were in school, and our sixth graders were in, the things that we expected just to be back to normal, and it's really not. And we have to take that into account in instruction for sure, but also in terms of advocacy as well. James, what are some things that you've seen in terms of misconceptions or misunderstandings or challenges?
Yeah, so continue off on that thought. I mean, I just read this thing about how we're now in our junior year of COVID, right? So if you want to think of it that way too, it's kind of a scary way to think about it. But I think it also comes down to, I agree with the idea that perception is the way to go on things, but it also depends on kind of what perception you're looking at taking it from, right? So if we're looking at taking it from the administrative standpoint or the teacher standpoint, those are two different things that have misconceptions built into them. So on the teacher standpoint, I think Jasmine is spot on, right? Like, where do we start? Are we still in October of 2019 or are we in October of 2021? Those are different places, right? Like, I have friends of mine who are trying to figure out where their ensembles fit. Do they still play grade 4 or 5 music in October, or are they slumping down to, not down, but are they realigning back to a 2.5 to try to get kids back up and running? And are they down by 40% or 60%, or are they just where they were before, pre-pandemic? I think too, the thing we need to remember is on the administrative side of the world, which makes our jobs harder, is there's a communication gap that exists. And it exists everywhere, right? So it's existing between administrators to teachers and teachers to administrators. It's existing between organizations and organizations. It's missing between school boards and superintendents. It's missing between health departments, state health departments, and schools, counties, and what we're doing in the state level. Like, there's just miscommunication kind of everywhere. I'm not going to say it's like faulty communication, but it's just like we're not all getting the same information that would be beneficial for us to all have. And part of that's excusable, right? Because if I put my principal's hat back on and I kind of start looking at, where we are in the building, there's 1,000 decisions they have to make every day with all their staff and students to try to figure out what to do, and a lot of external pressure that didn't exist pre-pandemic. And now that we're in this whatever phase I'd like to say we're post-pandemic, but whatever phase we're in the pandemic, right? We still have that thing. And so one of the misconceptions I still see a lot of from people around there is like, well, my administration is just not having me do this. They're just not letting me do it. And my big thing back is like, have you supplied the 5 options that you're willing to live with, right? And say, hey, administrator, here's my 5 things to solve my problem. Which one are you comfortable with? And no matter what they pick, let them pick one, then you go and run with it. I think we can solve some of those communication things, but communication is really an area where I think as we enter this next phase of the pandemic is becoming more of a struggle, because everyone wants everything back up and running full speed. And not everyone is all there yet. So that's kind of where I'm thinking one of our biggest challenges are at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Communication for sure is the key, and perception, seeing things from somebody else's shoes, from those administrators. And you're right, being problem solvers as opposed to just complainers. You won't let me do my concert. Well, here's 5 different ways maybe that we could make it work and have it be safe for everybody. So and you're right, everyone has a lot on their plates, but if we can offer some suggestions to those administrators, we might be a little bit more successful. So really the next phase is I want to kind of give us some context and kind of how we got here. So James, maybe you can start us off on this, on how we got to this point with the aerosol study and some of the things that you've done in tandem, NAFME and NFHS. If you can just walk us through how we got here when pandemic, start from pandemic on.
Sure.
In a nutshell.
Right. All right. So let's take the last 20 months and we'll condense it down in about 2 minutes here and go from there. So that's a joke. So what we're going to do is back in April of 2020, Mark Speed, who's the president of CBNEA, came in and he's like, we have a big problem. And I think all of us he contacted were like, yeah, we have a giant problem. What do we do about it? he's like, well, here's 300 articles that kind of say that this thing has to be airborne. And we're like, all right. So I read those and immediately reached back out to Mark, said, yeah, I think you're right. This thing's going to be airborne. And then that week, the Skagit Valley coral incident happened as well. And so that was the catalyst that said, all right, so super spreaders are happening through some sort of aerosol transmission. And at the time they were trying to go through like, well, was it the buffet line table? Was it, they were standing too close? Was it, a whole bunch of questions. The thing is, all of those questions are unfair to ask for the Skagit Valley Choir people to defend themselves on. So I feel bad constantly bringing them up, but it was the first event that happened. That happened so early in the pandemic, we really had no idea what was truly going on. And so they didn't even have any tools in their toolbox at all to prevent what happened. However, the fact that it did happen set off to the path that all music is going to be super dangerous. If I continue on to a third misconception, is that it's simply inaccurate, right? So does music activity have a lot of aerosolization production? Yes. Is it easily mitigated? Yes. Is it expensive to mitigate? No. Is it hard to mitigate? No. I know I said that last question twice in two different directions, but the answer is the same. So I think that's one thing we really need to get past. And so when Mark and I were going down this path, like, well, we need to find a reputable scientist that does this in a lab and can have their lab turned back on. Because remember, everything was shut down in April 2020. And so Mark's like, I think I know a guy who knows a guy. It's like the mafia at that point. You're not sure who you're going to get. But we were very lucky to get Dr. Shelley Miller out of the University of Colorado Boulder, who's like, yeah, I think you guys are right. I think this is the way to go. We can write this up and get IRB approval, and we can do the thing. And I think we've got the right lab assistant, the right lab, and all the things we can make happen. And so we're like, this is great. How much is that going to cost? She's like, I think like 30 to 35,000. And Mark kind of like, awesome. We can get that between the two of us. We are good to go. And then I woke up at like 2:00 in the morning, as I do often during COVID time. And I texted Mark and I'm like, we need to duplicate this whole thing. We need a second lab. And so then after he read that and kind of picked his job off the floor, he's like, yeah, I think we're probably going to have to get a second lab. So then luckily Shelley knew Yelena because I'd be detached labs. So we didn't have any issues there. And so to Yelena Schreebrink came on, also a brilliant scientist and all of this stuff. 2 different skill sets, which was really important for us, and 2 different lab approaches and all that kind of stuff. Well, then it went from 35,000 to 70,000. And then we gave them the design for all we want studied, which is across the gamut of everything to deal with performing arts. So it's not just music, it's music and theater and speech programs. And so then it jumped from like that to $250,000 to 300,000 to 330,000. We're like, geez. So we were lucky. We started this coalition of international performing arts organizations. We got 125 of them put together, and we cobbled together $332,000 in 22 days. And I never want to do that again. And we were very fortunate to have that happen, where then we can say, all right, scientists, we have all the money, we have all the resources you need. Now let's get this in the lab. And we pushed them really hard, in a hard way, to where Mark and I have apologized to both of them several times for how hard we've pushed. But we also knew if we didn't have stuff out in July, August, and November like we did in 2020, we were going to have no music programs occurring in the country ever. One area we're very fortunate of is by the time 2020 ended, we have estimated out from some different surveys we've taken that we got about 4.5 million of the 6.7 million students in music back into music in 2020. So we're very excited about that aspect. I think that was a testament to what the aerosol study did. Also, we did a lot of behind the scenes work with departments of health and departments of education to try to make sure that they're getting back in to music programs in their schools, because there's still a misconception out there that's like, we just can't do music anywhere but outdoors. Well, that is not true. I will say that several times tonight. So then, in order to get back into what were happening in the spring, or in the spring of 2021, my music chair kind of was like, James, all my teachers have no idea what to do to get back into the classroom. I was like, all right, so we need to do a return to music thing. So we did phase 1, on which was, I think we launched, Susan, you were not a part of phase 1, you're part of phase 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. So in phase 1, we launched that in May or April. I don't remember. It all kind of blends together. And phase 1 was pretty successful. We had a lot of good feedback on there. And then people were like, we need more. So then we reached out to our friends over at NAFME to expand what we could do in phase 2, and then walking into the classroom back in phase 3. And then we had all of that wrapped up by the beginning of September, or late August, beginning of September. And I think it's a great resource that we'll talk about here as we go through the rest of the day today. That's kind of where we started 20 months ago to getting us here today. And so what I'm hopeful is that when we start fall of 2022, we're going to be back up to our 6+ million students in the music classrooms, because that's really where we need to be.
Absolutely. Thank you for that background. I think that gives everybody a little bit of perspective on where we are. So advocacy in general, and that's what you do full time now, right? Jasmine is dealing with the states in the advocacy area. So what is advocacy, and how can we be successful in advocating for our programs?
Okay. Okay, Susan. That's my jam.
That's why I
I was
asked
like,
it.
wait, what's advocacy? That could be a long time. No, so keep me honest on my time. But so as an educator, I was actually teaching during COVID, and I experienced, we can't do music. So definitely had to advocate for my students, and I use those resources to help support. But back to your question on what advocacy is. So if you look it up in the dictionary, it's like public support or recommendation for a cause, right? And I found that definition to be lacking. So I was talking with some friends of mine a couple of years ago, and Dave Albert, who's in North Carolina, where I'm based at, I was like, Dave, what do you think advocacy is? And he puts it like this. He says, getting people to act positively on your behalf. And I love that definition because of three things. One, it's people and not just one person, myself. As educators, we have got to lean on our networks and find those people that can help support us in our advocacy work. Two, acting. It's not just about talking, it's about getting the work done, because we have all kinds of people who say, yeah, we love music. Yeah, we love your ensembles. They're great. But to act on it and to make decisions, whether it's policy, whether it's funding, whether it's scheduling, whether it's just showing up and having numbers and allowing those students to come, that's important. So action, I need action more than just talk, right? And then positively, we have people that make decisions on our behalf all the time, whether it is for the scheduling and having kids not take our class because it's not educational, or if it's like, oh, you need to be in music, this is going to be the place for you. So getting people to act positively on our behalf is what I think advocacy is. Now, to make that effective advocacy, to make it lasting, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where our job is as educators, to build those relationships that are going to be lasting. So yeah, that's my like super short condensed. I'm going to try to contain myself as much as possible when it talks about advocacy. But in the short, it's getting people to act positively on your behalf and ultimately the behalf of your students, and getting them what they need. So
Awesome. Well, so James, I'm going to throw this to you as the administrator. How should we talk to administrators? How should we talk to those stakeholders to advocate for what the things we need? We've seen a lot of people have to do that with the ESSER funds and talk to people about things. I know for myself as a music teacher, I was not good at asking for things. I just wanted, leave me alone, let me do my thing. I don't want to, if the principal didn't hear from me, it was a good thing, right? But now we have to advocate for ourselves. So how should we speak to those people in charge?
So there's a couple of things. So when I was administrator, one of the things I had is there's a no whining policy, right? So you're coming with a problem and no solutions, that's whining, is just not allowed, right? So come with your problems and come with some solutions, because we all know what we want to see happen at the end. And we can't just rely on our administrators saying, yep, I already see your vision, so I'm already going to be where you're at. So we need to show them like the roadmap to where we're going to be. I think the other thing too is to make sure that we have good lines of communications when we don't need something, right? I think that's the other part of it. I always hated it when I'm like, I'm going to walk into a building or I'm going to walk down the hallway and I'm going to see a teacher coming. I'm like, I know they're going to ask for something right now. Like, it's never going to be just a, hey, how's it going? We're glad you're here. It's just going to be like a, hey, thanks for being here. I need these 7 things and I'd like them by tomorrow, right? And so what we really want to do, or, you always have that teacher who's like, I have a problem with a kid, come solve it with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's come do this. Where I think it really behooves us a lot is building relationships, right? I speak a lot about working with your administrators. And one of the things I have a visual about a bridge, right? And so you can't connect the middle of the bridge unless you both come from both sides of that bridge. And that's something we really need to really focus on when we talk to our administrators. So when I was teaching, and I may have annoyed my principal, and that's perfectly fine. We're still friends today. But, I would always show up once a week and be like, hey, Jason, here's everything I'm doing in orchestra. It's a great day to have orchestra in Aberdeen Central, right? And then he's like, oh yeah, that's good. And then we'd come through and like the next week, I'd be like, hey, Jason, it's another great day to be in Aberdeen Orchestra, and here's the good things that are happening. And so he's getting like 2 to 3 good reports in a row. And then what I would do is whenever I needed something, I drop a hint in one of those good news reports, right? I'd be like, this is going really well. However, I'm going to come back and talk to you about this thing because I just need to think about it a little more, but I'm just going to toss it out there a little bit. But it's still a darn good day to have orchestra in Aberdeen Central, right? So then the next time I come see him, I'm like, hey, I really had this issue that I need you to help me with. I kind of mentioned it last time. I think I've got some good solutions for you. Here's my solutions. Which one do you like? And he'd be like, do that one. What happens when you set it up that way is they're already getting positive, positive, positive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he needs something. He's not complaining about this. He's just like, I need to know what the school is going to allow me to do. And then the big thing is follow through on that solution that's chosen between the two of you, right? So you go back to your classroom, you start working the problem, it's solved, and then you give a good news report being like, hey man, thanks for helping me out with that thing. Here's what came out of that. And now I'm really excited because it's still a darn good day to have orchestra in Aberdeen Central, right? But it's that kind of advocacy kind of conversation because it doesn't seem like advocacy. And these conversations are not long. They're 45 seconds, they're 2 minutes, right? And then on the problem day, you're going to say, hey, I need 5 minutes. That's where your school secretary really helps you out with, right? Like, because they are the gatekeepers. Be like, hey, Shelly, I need 5 extra minutes with Jason today. And then because you're the good news guy most of the time or person, right? They're gonna be like, all right, yeah, we'll get you 5 minutes and go in and solve the problem and move forward. It really takes that kind of relationship building because they need to be seen as because so many times music programs, and I was guilty of this when I first started teaching, I just tunneled myself into the music department, right? Never really went out. And I'm just kind of like, okay, floundering around. Then all of a sudden, like things are kind of escaping out of my control. And so that's when it's like, okay, now I need principals to come with, but now I have no relationship built up with them. And so this was a maneuver. I started my second year of teaching, and it's really been successful for me.
Yeah, nobody listens to anybody who complains all the time, right? So we all kind of turn it off, and that's what our administrators do as well. So we have to build those relationships. You're absolutely right. Well, Jasmine, do you have some thoughts on, like, with all this misinformation out there, how do we re-inform people? How do we avoid that misinformation that we still are suffering from the first choral experience that we spoke of earlier? How do we kind of redirect and re-inform?
Well, I think what James was talking about is having those established communication lines open, right? And then you can only do what the people that you're working with allow you to do. So making sure that you have that updated information and you presenting that whenever that conversation comes up. I know when I was in the classroom during COVID, there was a misconception that we couldn't do music safely. And that was at the county level. And so I ended up having to find the people that were making those decisions. I found their email and I was like, hey, just to let you know, I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing and creating a safe space, but here's all the things that have been proven to be safe for music education. And luckily enough, the person that received the email was very receptive. We got on the phone, we had a conversation, and helped clear up some misconceptions. And we actually got that decision changed, and so that we could have music making in the schools. So, but not every time is going to be that way, right? So sometimes people are just going to dig into that misconception because it might not be the right time for them to receive it. There might be other things that are happening. But I think just being consistent about sharing the information, about keeping those lines of communication open, and being curious as to where they're getting their information from, and trying to align your goals with what their needs are. I think James mentioned it earlier, coming with some possible solutions on how to make that happen. But just recognizing that, like, be consistent and to keep just pushing out the information whenever possible, and try to find different points of access, because maybe that person might say no on that one day, but that no doesn't mean every day from every person for the rest of the year. Like, there may be somebody else that you could reach out to and say, hey, did you know X, Y, and Z? And they might have influence, or it might be parents that could help support you in it. It could be your principal. It could be the secretary. It could be a whole host of people. So be creative in who you talk to.
Yeah, and arming them with the information. James, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think too, the other side to look at that is find out what their rationale is to saying that we can't do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they may have a goal now, when it comes to the health and safety stuff, our main goal with everybody is to keep everyone as safe as possible, right? However, they may have a misconception of what they are doing is actually preventing something that's not actually being prevented, right? So if their goal is saying, well, we're not doing music because it's not having music is preventing you from getting COVID, then that's a different approach and conversation than just saying that we just don't know what we're talking about, right? Because in full disclosure, I've had conversations with tons of health departments. Some are just like, we just don't know. I'm like, that's great. Here's 1,000 pages of information to help you know things, and here's a one sheeter that kind of says the big rocks, right?
Mhm.
But then here's all the backup. But their other thing could be, you know what? We don't have the staffing to do what the county is requiring us to do for distancing, or we don't have the supply chain issues have been shattered with getting the right PPE and that's required by the state of the county health department. Right. But we may not know that as a teacher staff, which is a very high likelihood that we don't know that. And so if we go back in and be like, all right, so why are you preventing this from happening? And have that honest conversation and find out what the real block of the path is for them. So then you go back, say, all right, let me think about that and come back, right? Don't actually give answers right off the bat because it makes it look combative. Think about it, come back. When you go back, be like, all right, so I thought about this. There's this local supplier that can find these things for us. There's this resource that shows that what we're doing in our classroom is just as safe as being in a language arts classroom. And if we're going to have language arts and math, we better have music because by federal law, we should be doing those things. It's a real thing written in code. So let's make sure they know that. And I think those are things that we should really be not forceful, but very factual and having lots of background information. So that way, when they have to go to their superior person that says, why did you allow this when this is what they're saying? Be like, well, here's all the information. I didn't know all this. They solved the issues for us on supply chains and whatever. But you really need to know what is their background of saying no before you can figure out a way to get them to say yes.
And it's
And I-
really about relationship building just in general, right? You can't, it's
Yeah.
just like I say to my college students, you have to know the kids before you can really teach them effectively. You have to know those administrators or the people at the central office before that they will hear you and build those relationships. Jasmine, what were you going to say?
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, I never really was a fan of this phrase, but it's kind of helped me when I do advocacy and not taking it personally, because a lot of the times they might say no, like James was talking about, because that's just the common thing is to say no. So when you do get that no, I mean, you might need to go and regroup and get yourself together because you're frustrated. But know that no, again, it's not going to be the end. You can still go back and try again. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of the times advocacy work, you're going to get a lot of no's. And
One of my
that's
college band directors would tell me to be a duck, let things kind of roll off your back. And it was not very good at that. I was never very, I tell you,
I know what my kids need. I know what they need, and I know what they need now. Like, I don't have time for a no.
yeah.
And it does get frustrating. So if you are getting frustrated in your advocacy work, that's unfortunately a part of the process. But no today doesn't mean no forever.
And I think part of that is the professionalism. I'm sorry, James, I'll go right back to you. But if we are the professional musicians and we're the professional educators, then we have to make sure that we stay at that level in terms of our behavior and our demeanor with those people that we're talking to, and also be really prepared so that we seem like we're the professionals and not just the whiners who want to have a concert because our kids want to play boomwhackers. I mean, they do, but there's a reason behind us wanting to pedagogically for us to be able to do that. So, James, what were you going to say?
First of all, I'm always up for a boomwhacker concert.
Yeah, boomwhacker.
Heck yeah. No, what I was going to say too is sometimes, like, I know the phrase is, the worst thing they're going to say is no when you ask for whatever. However, at the same time, sometimes the best answer you actually get is a no answer, because it allows you to go back and reframe like what you were talking about. I had that issue just in my current role where I wanted to change all this stuff this is on the debate side of the world. And my executive director was like, yeah, I just don't think that's a good idea. I'm like, but it is a good idea. I don't know what you mean it's not a good idea. And she's like, it's just not a good idea. Go back and rethink this and come back with something else. And I'm like, okay, but it's a good idea. Anyway, so what I did was I went back to my committee and my group, and I was like, all right, so here's what we have to figure out. And it actually turned out that we were probably not on the wrong path, but not solidly in the middle of the right path. And it really helped us figure out better mechanisms and systems to really make what we were trying to do on the debate side of the world better. The same thing can be true in advocacy. Sometimes that no answer allows you to go back to your team and say, what did we not understand with what we're doing? And you have to do your gripe session first. Like, I can't believe they told us no. Get that off your back really quick. And then go into, Now, why do they say no? And like, what did we miss? Or if we didn't miss anything, what did we not explain well enough? Right? Like, there's always those things. It's not always your fault. Sometimes it's just no because, as you said, Susan, it's easy to say no as an administrator. It just is. Because saying yes means there's lots of action items that can happen after that. Saying no means someone's just walking out of your office and your day continues. And so that could be the answer as well. But we just need to remember, we just need to go back and reflect on like, how can we get that no to be a yes if it's something we're really passionate about? One of the phrases I use a lot is, if it's important, the money will be there. And so you have to show your administrators that what you're asking for is important, and then the resources you need will be there.
And I think,
Awesome.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, while James was talking, it made me remember, when I started advocacy work, I would be like, I just want support. And then my principal would go, that's nice, but what do you mean? And I'd go, I don't know. So I think like, yes, I need money, but why? Why do you need money? What are you going to spend? Yes, I want to buy these instruments. Why is that important? So being specific when you do have those asks is vital to your success, but also aligning your ask with their goals is really going to help make it important, right? Why is it important that my students are participating and fully engaged? Because that's a marker for my school system, right? Student engagement. Why is it that using these instruments are going to be better than using X, Y, and Z instruments? Well, because it increases their social emotional experience, and in X, Y, and Z, it's helping with their coordination. That was one of our school goals. And the language skills, making sure that you're specific, but also aligning your goals with your administrative goals, your school goals, or your school system's goals. That's what makes advocacy lasting, is that you're not alone, like James was talking about. You're not just in your own little space, but you're connected to this whole school life educational experience.
Yeah, and put that in your rationale when you talk with your administrators, right? Be like, I need this stuff because of board goal, blah, 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 whatever your coding system is, and attach it to everything you're asking for, because it's a lot harder to deny when you know that.
Yep.
One of my favorite stories about instruments was Richard Saucedo was talking about when he was first at Carmel. They had not great instruments and they were in all disrepair, and he couldn't get the budget that he needed to kind of get them up to where they were going. And so then he was repairing instruments that it was becoming, a spiral down, right? You're just dumping money into things that aren't a good investment. And once he finally got the financial officer to see that they were repairing things that were beyond repair and really wasting the district's money rather than investing it in new instruments, that's all it took. He said, don't you ever spend our money doing that again. I'll buy you whatever it is that you need to, but it's just putting it into context for them. Just like we talked about with like lesson plans or whatever. It needs to be where our administrator, we need to put it in their language. We assess all the time. We just aren't good at telling them that we do that. So same thing, the things that they're fighting for concerning in the classroom or COVID and instruments and things. So yeah, great points. Well, so where are we right now? I think that's what really everybody kind of wants to get to. Like what, where are we with, what do we know? James, we'll start with you about the aerosol study and what are we seeing with the science, and then and Jasmine, maybe we'll talk about what should we be focused on? What should we be fighting for right now?
Yeah, so where we're at on the aerosol study is that we put out a update back in July about getting ready for the fall. Had the 5 same things about mitigations. One thing we don't talk about a lot in there is the vaccination component, just because that's beyond the scope of the study in which we're doing. However, we also know that a bulk of the kids who are in our music programs, K6, none of them are vaccinated, right? I mean, some 6th graders are if they have 12-year-old birthdays coming up, whatever. But by and large, we're sitting there, and we're only sitting at about 50% nationwide of kids from age 12 to 17 that are vaccinated, which is lower than the standard or lower than the general population. The other thing we know about vaccinations at the moment is that the window between 12 and 15 is actually only like 25 to 30%. And so we're really not getting a high vaccination rate in those age groups, which makes me worried for when little kids are eligible for those 5 to 11-year-olds, that we'll probably hit a quick 20 to 25%, and then we'll stagnate after that, just because of what we see with the 12 to 15-year-olds. With that means that if you are in an area where COVID infections are running rampant in your community, that we know that our mitigations from the aerosol study are highly effective. We know that they're 80 to 90% and reducing the aerosols. And the way to think about that, because somebody's like, well, Delta, how do you guys stop Delta with the same thing you stopped the original strain with? Well, we didn't stop the virus with the mitigation strategies. We stopped the vehicle in which the virus travels in. And so, for example, if you think of like a big highway and all these cars are on the highway, and that's the Delta virus just constantly on the highway, well, then you figure out a way to stop cars from getting on the highway. That highway clears out. There's a lot less virus to transmit around because we're stopping the vehicle in which the virus transmits. And so that's all really helpful. I think one of the biggest things you can purchase with your ESSER funds, as far as it comes to health and safety mitigations, is HEPA air cleaners for the size of your room. 100%. And they should be done and then put in your purchase plan to have the replacement filters for like the next 10 years, right? Just buy them all at one shot. They're not going to go bad. But then what's nice about that is like if we were to actually do what we should do in the United States, which is buy a HEPA air cleaner for every classroom in the United States, we've watched childhood asthma rates drop by like 30%. We'd watch all these like real health benefits occur because our buildings are not built for us to actually breathe inside of. They just weren't built that way. They were built for other purposes, like just holding people. And especially if you're in a building that's over 30 years old, it's definitely not built for that. And so HEPA air cleaners really do an amazing job if they're for the size of the room that you're in. But otherwise, like bell covers and masks, those are still very highly effective with as long as you're using correct materials. And then the spacing of 3 feet or so. And the reason why we do 3 feet is if you're using a bell cover or a mask, we know that under 50 minutes of time, that aerosol cloud does not accumulate larger than the 3 foot area when using mitigations. Now, if you're not using a bell cover or a mask while you're singing, that cloud gets really big really fast. And so then you may have to have different spacing issues there. But with all the mitigations being used, we know that your chances of spreading COVID in your classroom are about 1 in 1.9 million. And we know this because when we surveyed 3,000 schools, we had 1,641 schools that had an active COVID case in their program. Now, that doesn't mean they got it there. It just means some kids showed up sick and went to band, orchestra, choir, or wherever. But then of those over 1,600 cases, only 8 of them had a spread from that infected person to another person. And of all of those, only 1 case that we had in 3,000 schools had it where it spread beyond 1 other person. So we don't know how those other 7 happened. It could happen in the cafeteria before they went to the band. We know one of them happened between 2 clarinetists because there's a problem with the clarinet. So the director's like, go fix this in the practice room. And they took masks off so I could see the clarinet stuff better. Well, that's going to obviously not follow the mitigations. So we do know that these mitigations are highly effective. And I think it's something that we can definitely lean on as we get into the winter months and we move from outdoor society to indoor society. We should, in theory, see a natural uptick of COVID cases. If that's the case in your area, these mitigations are highly effective.
Wow, you say that a lot, I can tell.
Yes.
You're ready to go. It's awesome.
Yeah. This and copyright, I am ready to go.
Yeah. Well, we just had the copyright talk in my class the other day, and we're gonna just a small plug for NFHS has a copyright course on their website that's free that you can do, and I highly recommend it for all music educators because it is a great help to kind of understand some of those things if you have some misunderstandings. But awesome. So Jasmine, what in terms of advocacy, what after we hear those things back and from the aerosol study and where things are right now, what do you think we should be focused on advocacy wise with those folks in the States?
Well, I always think as educators in the classroom, just doing the best to make your environment, your classroom safe for all of your students, right? And then when you identify those specific needs, digging in and finding where your ESSER funds are being spent. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the conversation is around learning loss, but music isn't included. And there are funds that could help support our learning loss through tutoring, right? What would that look like for our schools, our music programs to have tutoring, to have performers or musicians come in and work with our students to support that learning loss through ESSER funds that are available to all of our schools? That would be amazing, right? To purchase those materials, those programs, whether it be music, whether it be resources for our students, the small needs, the reeds, the oils, the instruments, the big needs as well, so they're not sharing instruments. I think it depends on the bandwidth that the teacher has, but the possibilities are endless. I think once you have started and you've got your feet under you and you're navigating a safe environment for your kids, an environment that's good for you, like mentally, then start looking and seeing who you can bring in to help support your advocacy efforts so that you're not doing that work alone, right? And then utilizing those touch points and those people to help bring a more supportive music program for yourself and your kids. I think that's the best thing that we can do as educators, right? It just depends on what you need and what your bandwidth is. I know it's a general answer, but
No,
I mean,
what we need. James? What were
I
you
was
gonna
gonna say, well, and don't forget when you're ready to do that, make sure that you're activating those booster groups if you have them, right? Like if you think teachers and parents want to get back to, teachers and students want to get back to performance, parents want to get back to performance. I heard my middle school son play in his band at the beginning of the school year for the first time in a year and a half. And I was like, I'm hearing live music. This is crazy. And students are playing, they're having fun, and they're smiling, they're doing what they do. But those parents want that to happen as well. And so if you don't feel like you're getting that kind of support as you as a teacher, or like Jasmine said, if you don't have the bandwidth to do it, send the parents in, right? Be like, hey, here's what I got. I don't have the chance to do more. I'll be happy to talk about it when you can, but I mean, where the principal's office is as easy as I do.
When I talk with people about advocacy, I equate it to marketing, right?
Mhm.
It's basically marketing your program, and your biggest marketing force are those parents, and they're going to either market for you negatively or positively. And if we can really kind of tune into that to have them market for us and advocate for us, whether that be taping something or writing something in an article, or if that's just day to day on the street saying, wow, I can't wait to get back to a choir concert. I can't wait to do this. I think that then the parents are the ones that influence the administrators, and they understand that it really is something that's very important, because when we put those arts parents together, they can certainly be a force. We've seen that across the country. They're very passionate about it. So kind of tapping into that in a positive way,
Yes.
the negative, everybody's got enough negative. We don't need more whining. We need positive answers. And I think that's what you were talking about a little bit earlier, James. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and utilizing your students, right? Like they are just as strong of an advocate because as an elementary educator, my students could tell me exactly what they needed and why Miss Sutton, can we make sure that we have blah, 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 because of X, Y, and Z. And they are amazing at it. And even though, they're 9 and 10 years old, but they can advocate for themselves in such a way that it changed my administration's viewpoint. And we were able to be successful because I laid that groundwork, but also they were advocating. So utilizing your students, not saying that you need to put them out there and be like, for the children, but I think that they recognize what they need. And if you are posing it to them in such a way that says, hey, what are you looking for? What do you need? I think they are able to share very eloquently, if you give them the opportunity, what their needs are. Because that's why we advocate, right? It's for them.
And I think this generation specifically understands influence, right? They are the Instagram crew. They get it. They don't want to buy something because somebody says you have to. They say they want to buy it because somebody else is using it, or they want to influence. So, and again, another story. I'm not a panelist, but I'll tell you another story. My daughter had a popcorn sale at her school. It was all online, and the students could set up their own little accounts and do a little video, holding taking a picture with their trombone. Please support the Bennett's Mill Band. And people will they want to support good. They want to see the things that, and we're not so great about saying it. We see the bad choices sometimes that people make, and giving them the opportunity to see the great things that our kids are doing, I think will even lend to that support even more.
It goes back, right? 3 good things for every 1 thing you need help with.
Yep.
So
awesome. Yeah. So moving forward, we're talking about, we don't have a ton of time left, but the biggest things that are on people's minds, obviously, are recruitment and performance. what teacher health just in general. Let's do that, and all this is kind of contained in this phase 3, right? Back to school things that you can find on either the NFHS or the NAFME website. There are lots of suggestions on things to be doing to take care of yourself as a teacher, and also the things you should be thinking about in terms of concerts. James, what are some things that you're seeing across the country that are working, or things that people are misunderstanding? Either one, in terms of concerts and gatherings.
So it really depends on where you're at, right? I mean, the whole pandemic is depending on what your zip code is. But I think one of the things we really want to look at is if you were in an uninterrupted program for all of last year, and there's some out there, there's not a lot, but there's some out there that are uninterrupted, then you're just kind of going the way you have been, and life is what it is. If you're one of those that had an interrupted program for a year or more, which is a lot of programs out there, I think a lot of people needed to take some time to reevaluate how they're going to step back into their programs, right? If you were a state level championship program going into the fall of 2019, you're probably not the same program you were 2 years later now, right? Going into fall of 2021. So it's going to be really dangerous for teachers to say, all right, and here we go, level 4, 5, 6 music, October 2021, here we are. You're going to burn out really quick. And I think we are seeing a lot of that. We saw a really high attrition rate happen in music education, which is very worrisome for, I think, all of us who are in that national advocacy field for music educators. I think the other thing that we see is the lack of morale that occurs right now. I think our morale of our music teachers is pretty low for a couple of reasons. One, everyone's being forced to get back into general education classes, right? Like they're like, get into math, get into reading, got to do all the things, right? We're not hearing that same fervor to get back into music classes. And it's harder because now we're trying to be like, no, yeah, include us. Let's do this too. We can do all the things. And so it's a different approach that's happening from the schools and the states and the counties. And so we have a morale issue as well. So when we look at what we need to do for our programs, I think the first thing we need to do is, what do we look at for music educators? How do we make sure they have enough tools to be successful? Did they start riding the bike in the pandemic? They should keep doing that even now, right? Like get a stationary bike for the winter and keep going. Find that time. If I were doing 1,000 things after school, do I need to continue to do 1,000 things after school? Not for my program, but for myself, right? Like, how do I need to make that balance work out? Because the worst thing we can have in a classroom is a burned out teacher in a classroom, right? That really is dangerous for the teacher and the students and the program. And so we want to make sure that our teachers are finding good ways to take care of themselves. And it's okay to ask for help. I'm just going to throw that out to everybody. You're not going to do this on your own. You need to talk to people. You need to talk to friends. You need to talk to relatives. You need to talk to your administrators. You need to talk to whoever you need to talk to make sure that you are set up in a way that makes you successful in the classroom. And I think we really talk about that a lot in the phase 3 stuff, and just be like, make sure you're really set up well to do those things. And then once we kind of make sure we've taken care of ourselves in that, some people be like, well, James, that's really selfish. We're here for the kids. True, but you're not here for the kids if you burn yourself out in November, right? If you don't come back after Thanksgiving break because you had a mental breakdown, you're not there for the kids anyway. So make sure you're taking care of number one there. Well, as far as being back into concerts, there's a lot of ways we can do this, right? Some are going full on back into regular concerts. Some are going hybrid concerts with like limited people and live streaming. Some are going live streaming only. There's a whole host of ways we can do those things. There's lots of tools out there to make sure all of them happen and happen with minimum risk. It's just a matter of making sure you know what you're doing early enough to make sure that you've asked all the questions on what you need to do in the class, in the auditorium. So are you having full audience with masks? Are you in a county that's like, we're not doing masks? Well, then you should probably think about something for your own self. Just throwing that out there as a person who studies aerosol far too much than they should as a music educator. But there's like those questions you need to ask, right? And how you're going to do those things, making sure you have your proper copyrights for streaming purposes, making sure those things are working right. And those are actually not hard questions to answer. They just have to be questions that need to be asked. But really focus on what you are able to do out of this pandemic. And if you're like, I'm going to go full bore back into it, and you're able to do it, more power to you. If you need to take a step back from a thing or two, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of having those conversations. Awesome. Sorry, I got on a soapbox there.
That's okay. Jasmine, do you have something to add, or I've got another question for you?
Yeah, I was gonna just say, it's okay if you ask your students what they think would be successful,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Because they have been out of school and not in that environment of where they're going to music class every day, and that might stress them out to go to grade 4 and 5, right? And then they want to quit and not come back because it's too much. So be okay with just saying, hey, you know what, we are definitely starting in a different place, and I'm looking for your input, because they might have their own thoughts, and they might have even experienced music in a different way that's just as important and just as engaging. And so that might even create an opportunity for you to reach different students if you're asking them, what do you think we should be doing with our time? Because we're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think the recruitment idea and finding new points of entry. I try to bring this up to my colleagues in the band world, and we're hesitant to it, right? Because, well, if they don't start in 6th grade band, then they're not going to have blah, blah, blah. And I didn't, in my program, I didn't have that luxury. I had a very transient program, and if you had a heartbeat, I wanted you in the band. I mean, it didn't matter when you were going to be a professional triangle player in 10th grade when you joined the band. That was just the way it was going to be. That was part of my philosophy. I do think if we overstress them, we're going to have some of the retention problems as well. I see people that are trying, as you were saying, James, to get right back up to speed. And some of it's excitement. It's not because we think we have this we do also have this unusual expectation for ourselves as music educators, right? We make the stress for ourselves. But I think some of it is we just want to get back to the norm so bad that we kind of ignore the last 2 years of our lives, and not take that into account with our students.
I had a friend of mine that started off, sight reading back in band. It's like, let's sight read level 2 and 2.5 music with our wind ensemble, right? Like top ensemble. And I'm sure that when they started, the students were like, this is easy. But then they got into it. They're like, it's probably not as easy as we thought, right? We haven't played as an ensemble in a year. And so it's going to take some of that working back up. And I'm a big fundamentals fan. And so just kind of building those fundamentals back up until you can kind of work in that way up again. And that's okay.
A piece of this that we haven't really talked about, and this is about student teaching, those people in the classroom. I was struck yesterday, the day before, I had a senior. She'll go student teach next semester, but she said to me this week, I'm going to teach this week, and it's the first time I've been in front of live students to teach in an observation. She's been watching videos for 3 semesters. And she was so thrilled. And that's another part of the morale, that we have to make sure that our collegiates, this is something that's very passionate for me for sure, but that they're engaged and that they get that feeling that we all have gotten as teachers, the love of teaching and also getting that feedback from a child, because we're going to lose them if we don't do that too. So being good mentors, I think, as well, for our teachers out there is pretty important.
And those college and those high school students who started the pandemic as a junior or a sophomore, and they've missed out on those developmental years and where they could have gone down the path of being music educators, right? They just were overwhelmed with the pandemic, and there was another path to take. So it's a lot to think about. You were talking about the middle school band, and I'm going, wait a second, those 8th graders, when was the last time they were in school in an actual ensemble? Was it 6th grade? Wait, hold on. Wait. Yeah, yes. So, I mean, in essentially like your middle schooler, everybody's beginning. So I think it's something for us to pause and think about as a profession is, we have gone through a year. Your school system might not have stopped, but for the majority of us, we stopped.
Right. Finding ways to build on those, to build our programs, and also to get the, even more the crux of teaching music, as opposed to just maybe teaching the name of our ensemble. And those last couple of years, sorry, that's my dig all the time, but
I like it.
Yeah. When this all started, my husband is a pretty big advocate for music education as well. And he's like, we're going to have 2 years of kids, and we're going to see these in our high schools. We're going to see it in our colleges, because it's generally our freshmen and sophomores that are in our college marching bands. We're going to see that dip everywhere, and we have to not panic. I think that's part of it as well, that as we advocate, we have to not let our administrators panic. I still hear people saying, oh, bands are small, well, yeah, it's going to take us a while to ramp back up and not to have these unrealistic expectations.
Well, that's a good use of your ESSER funds, right? They're going to be around for a long time. And so, I mean, not an infinite amount of time, but like a year or two, right? And so if
24.
your bands are small, that's where you say, well, I need those extra funds to keep my staff where they're at. So that way we can rebuild back to where we were pre-pandemic. And then once you're back up to pre-pandemic, you don't need those extra funds because you've rebuilt your program up there to the point where some of the enrollment has come back. And that's a good use of those extra funds as well. But don't try to kill yourself on that, right? Like it takes 6 months to destroy a program. It takes 7 years to build one back up again. And we need to be realistic with what that is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, any kind of closing words here before we kind of close things out? I'm not sure if we have any questions coming in from our attendees, and also we've got plenty of people on Facebook as well. But do you want to kind of wrap us up, Jasmine? Some words you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about taking care of yourself. As an educator, I learned that the hard way. I always laughed when the flight attendant was like, "Put your mask on first." And it's so hard for us as educators because we are in a service profession, and it's like, we got to do X, Y, and Z. But it is so important, like James said, if you started riding the bike, find time to ride the bike. In the end, our kids need healthy teachers. If we are not healthy, then they will not be healthy. It will not be a healthy environment for them. So take care of yourself, and have grace to be flexible and to just breathe. We collectively breathe in my class all the time, because if I got stressed out, they would get stressed out. So just find those ways. And I know a lot of people are talking about self-care. And there's no amount of self-care that can help us handle all the stuff that we're dealing with. But now more than ever, we really need to just pause and find those ways to take care of ourselves. So
Awesome. James?
Yeah, I just want to throw out a big thank you to all the music teachers out there. I mean, what you've done in the last 20 months is nothing less than miraculous. And I make a joke. It's not really a joke, but if you want to solve a problem, you give it to a music teacher and they're going to figure it out pretty quick. And you have done all of that and then some throughout the last 20 months. And so just a huge thank you for figuring out how to keep kids in music, how to do it with keeping yourself sane. And I think that we have an opportunity at the moment to reinvent what music education means and feels like to a way that we can exceed what we had pre-pandemic if we do it right and we don't try to kill ourselves doing it. But let's just not burn out. Let's go ahead and have a great year. And thank you for everything that you have been doing for the last 20 months.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank both of the organizations that you two both represent. Sometimes large national organizations, people are like, what do they do for me? I don't get it. Why do I have to be a part of that? And if in this pandemic, people don't know, they're not looking hard enough, because both organizations have gone to bat for music teachers, for music education in general. And there's so much information on both of the websites on what to do, how to do it. We are here for you. Music teachers are not out there by themselves. Arts teachers, we have at least 2 large organizations who are advocating for us. It's their full-time job to advocate all the time. So thank you both for all that your organizations do, as well as Music for All, who advocates for music education all the time. And if you have not checked out their Advocacy and Action series, I encourage you to check that out on the website as well. I'll just close up with Music for All's mission is to create, provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through Music for All. Our vision is to be a catalyst to ensure that every child across America has access and opportunity to participate in active music making in his or her scholastic environment. I want to thank our guests, Jasmine Sutton and James Weaver, for being with us this evening. We'd also like to thank our national presenting sponsor, the Yamaha Corporation of America. Be sure to check out the Yamaha Educator Suite at yamahaeducatorsuite.com. And before we want to sign off, we want to also say how grateful Music for All is to have the opportunity to be back together at the Bands of America Championships. After 22 months of not being able to hold in-person events, I will be the contest director of the Jacksonville show this weekend. I'm going to one myself. Ticket sales and event-related revenue from these events have historically sustained us year-round, serving more than 150,000 students and teacher participants each year. We thank our dedicated donors for their continued support and generosity generosity, which helps sustain Music for All. And if you would like to be one of those people as well, you can do that through our websites to keep these kind of things going that we offer to you. And finally, remember, both our Mind the Gap and Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music are available as audio podcasts wherever it is that you listen to those. So make sure you subscribe so you don't ever miss an episode. Next week is going to be back with David Starnes, and his title is going to be Together We're Better, Inclusive Music Education That Builds Relationships, with panelists Judy Duty from United Sound and Rhonda Bernard and my research buddy, Jarrell Horton, director of bands from Vestavia Hills in Birmingham. It'll be a session that you don't want to miss. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Have a wonderful evening. Take care of yourself and say positive things about your programs to everybody and advocate all the time. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for being with us.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Susan.
you.
Take care.